Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
We begin with demonstrations on college campuses across the country tied to the Israel-Hamas conflict in Gaza. More than 100 students were arrested last week for trespassing at a pro-Palestinian rally at Columbia University. Now, similar protests are cropping up at other elite institutions. Early yesterday, police at Yale arrested 60 people, including 47 students. Protesters established an encampment as well at a central building on the campus of MIT. Some of these demonstrations have featured anti-Semitic and intimidating chants and posters. President Biden responded yesterday as he left an Earth Day event in Virginia.
I condemn the anti-Semitic protests. That's why I've set up a program to deal with that. I also condemn those who don't understand what's going on with the Palestinians.
Now, President Biden is expressing concerns about anti-Semitic violence during this week's Passover holiday. The protesters say their goal is to draw attention to the humanitarian concerns in Gaza.
Well, Nathan, the protests have drawn condemnation from not only the White House, but billionaire university donors are speaking out as well. New England Patriots owner Robert Kraft is pulling his support for Columbia University over the treatment of Jewish students and faculty during the protests. He tells Fox News this is unacceptable.
I just can't believe in New York City at Columbia University, Jewish students are afraid to go to classes. It's just, in the United States of America in 2024, it's amazing to me and horrible.
And the announcement from Bob Kraft, a former Columbia student and major donor, adds to pressure on the university, whose president is facing calls by members of Congress to resign. Billionaire Leon Cooperman is also weighing his support for Columbia, calling the protesters, quote, crazy, and saying they need to be controlled.
And Karen, these protests come as Israel returns its focus to the city of Rafah. Israel wants to eliminate what it says is the last remaining Hamas stronghold in Gaza. A potential invasion of that Egyptian border city is reviving international concerns about the fate of about 1 million civilians sheltering there. The U.S. has strongly urged Israel not to invade the densely populated city.
Meanwhile, Nathan, the U.S. Secretary of State is denying a human rights double standard for Israel. Antony Blinken told reporters in Washington yesterday that the U.S. is examining allegations of human rights and international law violations in Gaza by both Israel and Hamas.
We are looking into reports, incidents that are brought to our attention, and we have a process to do that, particularly if there are questions about whether U.S. arms have been involved.
And Secretary of State Antony Blinken's comments follow the State Department's release of its 2023 country reports on human rights practices.
And turning the focus to China now, Karen, Apple's iPhone sales in the country have seen their worst performance since 2020. That's according to data from the independent research firm Counterpoint. It says sales in China fell 19% in the first quarter. In contrast, Huawei saw its sales climb by almost 70% over the same period. Bloomberg's Edwin Chan has more details from Hong Kong.
This is the first kind of real snapshot of what's happening in China. What it is Apple's popularity has been steadily declining. I think around the time, but certainly not just after Huawei released its now infamous Mate 60 smartphone, the one with the advanced Made in China chip. And I think what that was kind of a wake-up call to many consumers within the country that local brands can outperform.
And Bloomberg's Edwin Chen notes China remains one of Apple's biggest markets, but sales there have struggled after Beijing escalated a ban on foreign devices in state-backed firms and government agencies.
Well, Nathan, focusing on politics in the U.S., it's the Senate's turn to vote on foreign aid on Capitol Hill, and Bloomberg's Amy Morris has a preview from Washington.
Senators had planned to spend this week taking part in congressional delegations around the world or meeting with constituents back in their home states. Instead, they're back on Capitol Hill for the first votes on a $95 billion foreign aid package. They'll start with a key test vote, cloture, to limit debate before a final vote to pass the bill. Now, this bill includes nearly $61 billion in aid for Ukraine, more than $26 billion for Israel, and more than $8 billion for the Indo-Pacific. It also includes measures to seize Russian assets, require TikTok's Chinese owner to divest the app, and impose sanctions on Iran. The first votes are set to take place this afternoon. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Amy, thank you. And speaking of TikTok, the company's gearing up to fight any U.S. ban or order to divest. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has that part of the story.
TikTok says it will move to the courts for a legal challenge. It sets up a watershed battle that could set a path for Chinese business in the U.S. 4 years ago, when the Trump administration threatened a ban, ByteDance worked out a preliminary deal to sell. It will not happen this time. Its sizzling growth makes it hard to part ways. China's seen moves on Huawei and is afraid it won't end with TikTok. It feels it may be able to leverage support from users, up to 170 million now. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, and thanks. Well, politics are also front and center in Manhattan, with more testimony on the way in the hush money trial of former President Trump. And Bloomberg's June Grasso has a preview.
Before testimony resumes this morning, Judge Juan Merchan will hold a hearing on the prosecution's request to hold the former president in contempt of court over social media posts that prosecutors contend violated a gag order prohibiting Trump from attacking key witnesses in the case. Then David Pecker, the former publisher of the National Enquirer, will retake the witness stand. In New York, June Grasso, Bloomberg Radio.
Okay, June, thanks. Now we turn to the key earnings report due out after the closing bell. Tesla reports its quarterly results this afternoon, and Bloomberg's Doug Krisner says this report will be crucial for the electric vehicle giant.
So far this year, Tesla stock is down nearly 43%. Sales have been slumping. Inventories are high. There have been confusing product decisions. And let's not forget those price cuts in China. After the bell, Tesla is expected to report a 40% plunge in operating profit. Revenue is expected to show its first decline in 4 years. And gross profit margin is expected to be the lowest in more than 6 years. Analyst Dan Ives of Wedbush calls it a moment of truth for Tesla. Ives recently said the conference call and commentary will likely have a huge impact. In New York, I'm Doug Krisner, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Doug, thank you. And taking a look at the earnings calendar today, we'll also hear from consumer bellwethers PepsiCo and UPS. Tech giants Meta, Microsoft, and Alphabet report Wednesday and Thursday this week. We'll also hear from ExxonMobil and Chevron Friday. About 180 companies report this week, representing over 40% of the S&P market value. And it's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Columbia University went to remote learning, and police arrested dozens of students at Yale and New York University as tensions over Israel's war with Hamas continue to grow on U.S. college campuses.
You have been warned by New York University to leave the area.
The moves at the Ivy League schools came hours before last evening's start of the Jewish holiday of Passover. New York Governor Kathy Hochul says she met with the president of Columbia University and NYPD officials to discuss public safety initiatives as student protests continue on the New York City campus. In a message posted to social media, Governor Hochul said protests have reached a point where students are afraid to walk on campus.
People need to find their humanity. Have the conversations, talk to each other, understand different points of view, because that's what college students should be doing.
NYPD Deputy Commissioner of Operations Kaz Daughtry.
We haven't received any reports of any physical harm against any student. However, if there's any student, Jewish or whoever, that's been assaulted or wants to make a police report or wants to talk to the police, we encourage them to call 911.
A New Haven, Connecticut police spokesperson said about 45 protesters were arrested at Yale yesterday and charged with misdemeanor trespassing. President Biden is heading to Tampa today, where he is set to talk about reproductive freedom. The president is expected to address Florida's 6-week abortion ban that goes into effect May 1st. Meanwhile, Vice President Harris spoke at an event in La Crosse, Wisconsin for reproductive freedoms.
More and more people will openly agree that one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree the government should not be telling her what to do with her body.
Without mentioning Donald Trump by name, Vice President Harris said he appointed Supreme Court justices with the intent of overturning Roe v. Wade. Finally, it looks like that $2.7 billion renovation paid off at Newark Airport's Terminal A. Skytrack named it the world's best new airport terminal. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg, Karen.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. It is time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update with John Stashower. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Memorable night at the Garden when it was over. Knicks fans didn't want to leave. Game 2 with Philadelphia. Knicks trailed at the half, but led by 8 in the fourth quarter and then trailed by 6 with a half-minute remaining. They were down by 5. It was time for an unforgettable sequence.
DiVincenzo to the corner. Brunson with 6. Pulls for 3. Off the rim and in. Got the bounce. 2-point game. Still loose. I don't hear a whistle. Hart took it away to DiVincenzo for 3. Missed it. Hartenstein grabs the offensive rebound, and the Knicks another shot. DiVincenzo for 3 in the lead. 13 seconds to go.
ESPN the call. Knicks won 104-101. Brunson hit that 3, but shot 8 of 29 after going 8 of 26 in Game 1. Even with his struggles, Knicks are up 2-0 heading to Philly for Game 3 Thursday. Home teams are 11-0 in the NBA playoffs. Cleveland beat Orlando. Denver came from 20 down in the second half, beat the Lakers on a Jamal Murray shot at the buzzer. Heartbreak for the Islanders in Raleigh. They had a 3-0 lead with 7 minutes left in the second period. The Hurricanes tied the game with 2:15 remaining and scored again 9 seconds later. They won 5-3, lead the series 2-0. Toronto on an Austin Matthews goal won 3-2 at Boston to tie the series at 1. The hat trick for Zach Hyman in Edmonton's series opening 7-4 win over LA. Vegas took the opener in Dallas 4-3. The Yankees sleepwalked through a Monday matinee 2-0 loss at the stadium to the lowly Oakland A's. They had only 3 hits. The Mets had 4 hits. Lost in San Francisco 5-2. The Jets found a team to take Zach Wilson. He's going to Denver with a 7th-round pick. Jets get a 6th-rounder in the 2021 draft. 5 quarterbacks were taken in the first 15 picks. Just 3 years later, 4 of them no longer with the team they were drafted by. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Karen, Nathan.
All right, John, thank you.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on SiriusXM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager. Some of the country's most elite college campuses are once again a flashpoint in the debate over the Israel-Hamas war, but that debate has now turned into a crackdown with police arresting dozens, if not hundreds, of pro-Palestinian demonstrators, including students at Columbia, Yale, and NYU since last week. For more, we are joined by Julie Norman, the professor of politics and international relations at University College London. Julie, it's good to speak with you once again. Good morning. I'd really be curious to get your perspective as an academic yourself on these protests happening in the Ivy Leagues and the response that we're seeing from campus administrators and police in many cases.
Yeah, well, thanks. And good morning, Nathan. I think what we're seeing play out obviously just underscores the deep passions, the emotions that have surrounded this conflict for years and often come out on college campuses and in other public places as well. This is something, it's a conflict that is political and seems very far away in many places, but also is very personal and very personal for many students. On campuses, I think it's particularly tricky because we see campus administrators trying to balance between ensuring that the campus feels safe for students, that students don't feel harassed or discriminated against, while also at the same time trying to protect free speech rights and the rights to protest and demonstrate. And we see those two duties and obligations essentially coming into conflict, this week at these campuses.
Yeah, it's a balance that we've seen these campuses really struggle with since the early days of the war in Gaza, when we saw the testimony on Capitol Hill from the now former president of Harvard and MIT and Penn as well, and how that was received. Is there a risk that the response that we're seeing now might have the pendulum swinging too far the other way?
Well, I think that's certainly the way it's being perceived by many, that this attempt to crack down on what many see were blatant disregard for student safety is maybe going, as you said, too far in terms of trying to crack down with police presence, with arrests, with suspensions, even for students who, were simply engaged in peaceful protests. And I would say it's, again, challenging for administrators in protest situations when there are some in the protest mix who are, saying very saying messages that would not be allowed on campus, even if the majority of those are not. And how do you police that? How do you deal with that? They resorted to this method of simply trying to clear the encampments. And as we've seen, that I think has just increased the blowback. And if anything, has just galvanized the encampment movement on these campuses and on other campuses as well.
And it's a blowback that the President Biden has had to confront as well. He was talking about it yesterday in Virginia, saying he condemns the protests as anti-Semitic, saying that a lot of the students don't understand the situation when it comes to the Palestinians. I wonder what you make of the president's response in our last minute.
Yeah, so, Biden has weighed in on this. He's condemned the anti-Semitism. It's obviously becoming an increasingly difficult path for him to walk in terms of campaigning either on or near college campuses without having these calls against his positions on Gaza. So I think he feels this very directly. In terms of the protests themselves, again, there's a lot of different messages in them. Some, I would say, the president and others do see very blatant anti-Semitism. I think many involved in them think they are just being critical of Israel. But I think the president is right that there's a lot of different levels of knowledge and different levels of engagement with the conflict from those who are out protesting. And that makes any kind of response to them very difficult.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, SiriusXM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.